Hello and welcome back to the Guns and Glory show. It is August 6th, 2025. These two airplanes just showed up from Hobby Lobby. $32 shipped, 10 bucks a piece. Just look up Jumbo Foam Glider on their website. They don't fly as well as the Titan does, but that's because the wings are set up wrong. This is called anhedral, where the wingtips droop down from the center. What you want is dihedral, where they go up like a V shape, which gives the airplane some inherent stability, which is critical for free flight gliders. I would have liked a couple of Titans, but they're like 60 bucks a piece right now on eBay. And I really have to finish paying off all this other equipment first. It looks like DJI is going to be banned from the United States for some very stupid reasons. And so I've got an 04 air unit on the way. I figured it's better to be in debt than not be able to buy one at all. I will fix the anhedral-dihedral problem during this build. And I had to put so much tungsten for tail weight in the Airhogs Titan that I think I'm just going to run 2 batteries in the back of this thing somehow. We'll figure it out. Find the center of gravity first. Make sure the distance between the balance beam and the center of the fuselage is equal. And you've got equal distance between the leading or trailing edge and the balance beam. When viewed from the side, it should sit on the balance beam just like that, maybe a little bit nose down. When you're building these airplanes, you're going to have it on and off of the balance beam several times. With a styrofoam wing on an airplane that weighs about 3 pounds when it's flight worthy, that will make a dent right at your CG points. You want to harden those CG points with something, whether a little disc of wood or just a quarter-sized dot of clear epoxy. It works pretty well. That'll stop that from happening, and it'll increase the accuracy of your balance beam. You can see where I reinforced the CG points with the epoxy, and while I had it mixed up, I reinforced the aileron and the elevator as well. I'll get the vertical stabilizer once this is cured. I'm going to trim this little nub off. Not a big fan of that, so we'll just drop this down to the elevator and then pull it out. Ah, nuts, we took a little chunk off of that. I'd rather not done that, but it won't hurt anything. It's just kind of annoying. And I suppose I can come through that about right there. And then sand it up a little bit with the block. I might just glue that little piece back in there, but we'll see. That turned out pretty good, except for that little goof. Whatever, I'll just fill it. Biggest consideration that I have with this airplane is keeping the weight down. In the Airhogs Titan, there were 9.5 ounces of tungsten in the tail to balance it. That's way too much. It flew, and it flew well. The whole thing was about 3 pounds and 2 ounces. But it's a half a pound too heavy in my opinion. So instead of cutting a compartment in the back to house the battery, making the tail very thin, which in the other one led it to the crash, I'm going to put 2 batteries on it, one on each side. I'll probably take advantage of that little finger groove that they put into it. And I'll put a carbon fiber tube down through the center of the fuselage. This was the wing spar out of the Aero's Prodigy. That'll stiffen that up just fine. On the other end of the ship, I want to push the whole cockpit rearward a little bit, which is great because the instrument panel was too close to the camera and it was out of focus, so I can push that forward. That'll correct both problems for me. We'll start this hole with a skinny drill bit. It'll increase the chances of getting it where I want it. I think that's a little bit too high. I'm going to try to lower that angle a little bit. Hopefully I don't screw that up. with the bit about the size of that tube that we put in. When I get it started, it'll turn it into like a pilot to guide it with. And now we'll try to bore it with the rod itself. Oh, come on. Tell you what, I'm going to trim an inch off of that and put the plug back in it. I didn't know if this would work or not, so I didn't film it, but I took the Dremel tool and I cut like a little sawtooth on that. And I'm using it to bore through the fuselage because I didn't have a drill bit big enough to do that. Well, I did, but it was bent. Okay, hopefully we have a little bit better luck with that. Yeah, that turns pretty good. All right. That's working out pretty well. Just trim that off right there and consider that to be installed. Just line up with the disc cutter and come up through it. Just like that. With that trimmed up, give it a little push with that drill bit. Fill it with some putty. Sand that black off of there. That just came from the carbon. Almost in the center, but I'd say it's good enough. I would have used these skinnier rods for that, but I think I'd like to have these things installed in the wings later. This one's a little bit happy on this side and the back. Not too bad over here, just a little bit. Figure out how to straighten it up. I'm going to try some hot water, see if that'll work. It does on the EPO foam to a point. It turns out hot water was all that needed. Let's try to drill through that elevator again. I'll go from the corner to about that slot. That way we don't have to set up a whole bunch of really careful measurements. The first inch or so is the most important. You can kind of feel that bit underneath your finger if you're too close. Like right then. Check the other side too. We got it now. All right, we'll do that twice. Once for each of them rods. You'd need a machine to go all the way through the whole thing to get one of them. That's okay though. And yeah, these carbon fiber rods are too big in diameter for that, so I'm gonna go get the wooden ones I've been using successfully the whole time. Start in on that side, make sure not to blow it out and come up right where you need to, twice. The only blowout I had was right there. That'll be easy enough to correct with a little bit of clear epoxy and some filler. I just continued that reinforcement line of epoxy all the way across. Just because I had it sitting on the piece of paper, it's better than just tossing it in the trash can. This worked well enough before. Let's try it again. I sharpened that to a point. Let's see if we can drill this thing into that wing. And I'm gonna guess that the heat from this thing might be enough to push it through. I don't know. I'm going to try to put it through the thickest part. Hopefully I don't regret this later by trying to put a wire through it somewhere. There's a mold line right in the center that'll give me a good place to start it. Try to parallel with the leading edge of the wing. That's just going right in there. It might start to squeal or something, I don't know. Well, that was way easier than I thought. Cool. Do that again. We got it. We'll just line this up. I don't know if you can see that black on that black piano or not, but that's right about there. And I'm gonna just do the same thing I did a minute ago. I gotta go sharpen the carbon fiber rod though. That went very well on both wings. You can just see that shadow right at the edge of where they've got the aileron marked. This one's stiff wing. I've got the airplane reinforced, that carbon fiber pipe in the rear section of the fuselage so we don't snap the tail off again. I've got the bamboo skewers in the horizontal stabilizer and the carbon fiber spars in the wings. Airplane's pretty strong at this point. I still need to insert 2 more skewers, or 3 I think, underneath the cockpit area. And now I guess I will open up the control surfaces. I'm going to go ahead and put 3 of these skewers in the nose section. Make sure you get it low enough where you're not going to interfere with the floor later. You still got to put supports in it to mount the camera. Once those 3 rods are in, grab a little bit of filler, clean those up. Just takes a second. I just need to get the elevator cut out of the horizontal stabilizer first. I suppose that'd be the easiest place to start. Just get ahead of the point where the epoxy is. And we'll just mark this off. I think I'll just go straight across it. I'll square it up, obviously. And then we can hinge that and use that for the elevator. Get this thing cut out of here. Hopefully it goes smoothly. We're going to run into that epoxy down there. Hopefully that doesn't cause too much of a problem. Hopefully. Yeah, we're into it. Come on, cut. Come on. Thank you. A little concerned about that. Hopefully I'm on the tape on both sides. That looks good. Oh, cool. I love it when a plane comes apart. This is plenty big enough for an elevator, but it's pretty thin. A little bit concerned about that. I don't know if I should try to run a shaft down through there or not. Or if maybe I'll just let the hinges provide the structure for it, but I've got to transfer the force from the servo through the control arm across the whole thing. I better figure out how to reinforce that somehow. I've got an idea. Let me play with it for a minute. Meanwhile, this will make a good point to come up here with the rudder from the vertical stabilizer. I will also need to take these nubs off of here so that I've got room for this to travel. That we can just do just like that. No real need to set that up to a complicated cut. Now this is bowed the other way, so you want to flex that just a little bit. Just like that. Otherwise, you're going to take a chunk out of that like I did earlier. There. Now it'll have room to move up and down. I'll still take a little nick off of that one just like I did on the Titan. Let's not break that now. Figure with a popsicle stick, at least a part of one, I can put that in there right in the center. We'll straighten out the bow and it'll be strong enough to work. And you'll never even see it. I'll also have to put that a little bit off the center because the hinges are going to need to be in the center. Sometimes when you get going on a project, you haven't got time to grab the camera. So I've got the popsicle stick in a slot, and then I've added these 3 hinges over here, and I sighted down to get these 2. I hope they're in the right spot. I've got 2 pieces of wood here to clamp down and give that a good hard squeeze. So I got that filled up with epoxy, and I'll need that to bond together as one unit. Once it's cured up, that'll be strong as it could be. I'll probably add a hinge here and one here also. You just mark the center. You take the width, cut it in half. I got 0.444. It'll be wider here than up here. If you just score it on this side and then on this side, split the difference. I marked it so it was easier to see. And then just cut a slot. Same thing on the opposite side. Just score it on both sides, split the difference. Keep the dog hair off of it. And then dry fit everything. I took a different hinge and loosened that. Go a little higher with that. Alright. There. Once you get it just right, epoxy it there. And once it's cured, you can cut the bevel out so that it'll move. I like the way that turned out. It'll be plenty rigid enough. I'm gonna add another hinge here and here though to stop the possibility of flutter at speed under G's. Very happy with the way it turned out. Yep, definitely like the extra 2 hinges. It works out. Elevator and rudder are on the airplane. I'll show you how to do that on the other runs. The only thing I have to do now is open up the bevel, and I think I'm going to make a jig of some sort to do that. Get these ailerons cut out of there, and I expect to run into a little bit of an issue with the epoxy over there, but we'll get through it. We'll get the hinges in these things, get them trimmed up, and ready for servos. Yeah, I just got just underneath that layer of epoxy, which is what I was planning on. I just didn't think it would work that well. I've got a Sharpie and mark these. Oh shoot. I'm gonna have to just grab that right now and fix it. I'm glad I looked. I don't know quite how I did that, but I did that. I'll glue it back in. I like to mark that right and left on that part of the aileron slot and the ailerons themselves, because that's the least likely place you're going to remove that mark. You're going to be beveling this out and cutting hinges in and mounting servos here and there. So if you put it there, it'll probably always stay there. Let's get the aileron mounted to the wing. The first thing to do is sand off one side of that a little bit so that you get a little bit of free play in there. You need that side to side motion. Not a lot of it, but it helps the aileron move, especially when the wing is flexing in flight. You don't want that to bind up. And don't sand off the letter that I sanded off 15 seconds after filming that last clip. So center up your hinges. I like to put a center point on those and then mark both sides of them. And do the same thing on the opposite side. Take a few minutes and make a jig. You need a lip like this. I've got this set up so that you can't put it through this way, but it will go into the jig that way. And what that allows you to do, get this below flush, is it allows you to change your blades without fooling around with it. Make sure that that slot is parallel with your lip there. And then tighten up the screw. There's no need to crush it, but put a good snug on it. And then you can tighten up your blade. So make sure if you're going to use the top edge, use the top edge on both. If you're going to use the bottom edge, that's fine. Just be consistent. Oh, this will be easier. Yeah, we're on the top. So, I already cut that one. Line up the edge of this here and sight down the wing or the aileron with that. And you'll want to do a plunge cut with your blade. And that should be a little bit more parallel now. You see I got that lip raised over there on the edge. That's not that great. So we'll reset that. It's not that big of a deal either. There, that's better. And now, carefully, don't come out the side of it and rip through your fingers. You can saw up and down a little bit. Just don't come off of that lip. Take a hinge and test fit it into the hole. That'll leave you room for some epoxy later. I'll do all 10 of these. Once you get all in slots opened up, grab a popsicle stick, because they're about the same thickness as a hinge anyway. And then force a little bit of that epoxy down in that slot. Always test fit the hinge into the slot first, just to open it up. I'm pretty sure I said that before in this video, but if I didn't, I'd rather say it twice than not. Yeah, before I get everything in here covered with epoxy, like if you get a hinge that's just a little bit cockeyed, just come back in with a blade that's freed from a jig and eyeball it. You can tell where it's at. The same thing when you first install the control surface on the wing. If one side of it's higher or lower, you can change it that way. The idea here is you don't want to glue up your hinges. All of these hinges have been used before. They're a little bit stiff, but I'd rather do that than have to buy a new one every single time. They don't last forever, but there's no point in throwing them away. I'll glue up this aileron and we'll put it back together. Once it's cured, then we'll make the bevel. All right, let's try to get that to go in. It's wanting to hang up over here. We'll just guide that in gently. Gently, all right. Having that hinge a little bit stiff makes it actually a little bit easier to put this together. Kind of holds it for you. Make sure you check your gap, that it's even. And this gap should be about the same width as the center of that hinge. Make sure you're even. This one's actually a little bit high, so we're gonna go ahead and do that thing with the razor blade that I was talking about a second ago. So we'll pop that out of there. I'll make another slot in that just above the other one. And then push that little piece down. There'll be a thin little layer in there. A little bit of epoxy in it. And then we'll put it back together. That's pretty good. You want to get that as perfect as you can get it. Good time to put the horizontal stabilizer in the elevator on the airplane. Mix up some 5-minute epoxy. So at the moment I've got the ailerons and the wings weighted and drying up, curing, not drying. Always make a little bit more epoxy than you need, and you can put it somewhere else if you need it. If you're smart, you'll have a plan for where you need that before you need that. And don't put that thing in upside down, you won't be happy. Make sure nothing's spilling out the edges there. And I like a little bit more epoxy on that rudder where I'm going to mount the control arms to it, control horns to it. I am too tired. I've got about 3.5 hours of sleep the last 3 days. That catches up with you after a while. Control arm is on the circle. And I want to flip this thing sideways real quick. Otherwise, I'll have a drop at the bottom of that I don't want. Now I need to separate the aileron from the wing. That one's a little stiffer than the other one. It's probably some epoxy where it shouldn't be, but we'll get that worked out. I need to take the straight edge and line it up where I can take the razor across it. And we'll trim out a little triangular shaped piece. It's best to put this in upside down because of this felt thing. It makes it sit up a little too high and it can throw you off. Now on the top of this thing, we're gonna go in just a little bit. And on the bottom of the wing, we're gonna go in there quite a bit because the hinge is oriented more toward the top surface of the wing, which is fine. Nothing wrong with doing that. We just got to keep in mind it will change your angle a little bit. You want the smaller one on the top surface of the wing for airflow. So we're just going to follow that across. And we're going to aim at basically the top of where those hinges are at. Fight through that epoxy section. A little deeper there, it kicks me out. And then we'll take that little bit of material out and it'll allow that wing to move. That epoxy really makes that rough, but it's just more efficient. Now when it starts piling up on that blade like that, you know you need to change your blade. But you're going to pull this triangular shaped piece out like I said. And you will accomplish what you're trying to do. Chase the little fuzzies out of there. And just continue until you're finished with it. We'll flip it over and do the bottom in a second. With a sharp blade, that just kind of goes right through there. That's more what you're looking for. The sharp blade makes a big difference, and if you cut yourself with it, it heals up a lot quicker. It just gets hung up on epoxy under the, above that hinge there. I like having a guide on this. It looks a lot nicer. I get a little bit better at these things every time I do them. I try to do better every time I do anything. It's just the way I've always been. On the bottom side, I'll flip it around because I'll be in the way of the camera. We'll come across here like this. It's a little bit wider. Because again, the hinge sits a little bit high. With the short of a wingspan, I want a great big flap. First flight on the Titan, I hadn't obviously set the trims yet, and it wound up upside down in the grass because I had the flaps down. It's harder to center those than it is with the wings, or the ailerons level flaps, whatever you want to call them. And it flipped over, so I turned the flap off. Nice. There, now it'll move. And it flew. Then I could get up to altitude and with the function switches set the trims for each, whether it's spoiler-on, aileron, or flap. It's August 8th and I've got all the flight control surfaces in and the bedding is prepared for the control horns and the 04 area that just showed up. That's not going in this one. We're flying with the 03 until I learn how to fly. And then I'll get that thing in the air because I'm not messing that up. I don't know if I'll ever be able to get another one. Now it's time to get the motors attached to the wings. First thing I did with it is simply eyeballed to figure out if the propeller tip was going to interfere with the fuselage. I want it pretty close because you don't want a whole lot of weight out on the wing, even though we've got a good spar in this. So I put it about right there and just made a dot. You take the calipers over here, figure out where your dot is. This is 3, 6, 9, and lock it there. Go to the front, and with this thing, follow that edge and leave a light score on it. Oop, stay in the track. It's really thin right here. Just leave a light score on it over here, and that will make sure that the motor mount is parallel to the wing root. And take that all the way across the wing too. You'll use it to, nice. You'll use it to sight down later. There's that center, like, thin there. And when that first screw is in, you can pin that down, sight that in, and establish where you want this to go this way. We're not quite that far along yet. And do the exact same thing to the other wing. By dragging that edge of the caliper across it. Be very careful to stay at 90-degree angle to the wing root and right on that edge. I'm gonna go ahead and do the bottom too. I don't know if I'll need that mark, but it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it, you know what I mean? For something as easy to do as that, you might as well. The next thing you want to do with this, now I know the wires are on the wrong side, but that little tab broke off in a crash and this is easier to use. It was symmetrical, so it'll do. I'll put the wires where they belong when they need to be there. So, the next thing you need to do is spot that line and put that hole on it. And then rotate the prop to where it's pretty close to the wing. And then you'll want to sight down like this. I put a black mark here. And then sight down to this thing, the center rail like I showed earlier, and get it squared up like that. Once you get it squared up, and you've got it as far away from the wingtip as you want it, I would want it farther back. Once you get it squared up from like here, go ahead and dot those. all three of them, and you will know right where you need to put that as far as that plane goes. Not airplane, the other plane. We got to drop this motor mount down in and try to get it as close to the cord line as possible. Oh yes, one more thing. When you're doing the other wing, we'll be measuring the distance. Since we cut this, we'll go from the leading edge to that, where that dot is. With this squared up, you'll measure the distance between the leading edge and the propeller tip here with it rotated down. And that will need to be the same on the other wing. Make sure you don't have something crooked. You've got to also make sure you're not too far up or down. The ideal, I like to have them a little bit in and a little bit up. We're talking about like 1 degree. I made a metal base plate to warm up and use as an iron into the styrofoam, and a little test piece. We'll see when we're about at the right temperature with this. And we'll take a couple of different jabs at this, I guess, because, yeah, that's pretty good. You don't want to take it all out at once. And make sure it's lined up right. Don't leave yourself room to do that a couple of times. Just want to make sure that you're using this cord line as a visual reference to that propeller to make sure you got pretty close to a 90-degree angle or a little bit up. Don't forget to get things level across here as well. The curvature of the wing breaks right there. There's a little bit of an edge, and I stopped that right there to keep that level. And pretty much 90 degrees to the cord line with the center of that prop right now. And I've got both of the wings even, so I'm gonna leave it right there. We'll put a layer of epoxy in here to strengthen it, and then I'll make a little hollow for a piece of plywood there for the nuts and bolts. I just flipped that piece of steel around to get to the edge, or a 90-degree edge rather, warmed it up, and then made the hollow for that piece of plywood. We'll epoxy that in place, and later on I'll fill it over with that foam filler. This will be a good time to get the epoxy mixed up and bond the wings to the fuselage permanently. The reason I wanted these wings on here right now is because I put a whole lot of epoxy in both of these engine mounts, and then I set it on the balance beam a little bit nose down so that that will level off and cure. And when I put this back in it, it should keep the propeller just a little bit up, so when you accelerate it goes up a little bit. You don't want to accelerate and have it go down. With a little bit of help from this laser, I'll be able to get these propellers perfectly square. So with a little bit of effort, you can move those around and get that laser to strike on all three of those propeller tips. Both of those motors are bolted in, and I believe they're about as straight as I can get them. I'd say they're strong enough. Next thing to do is to get the speed controls in it. I put a couple of zip ties on that to clean it up a little bit, and I'll see if I can get that oriented right about there. I'll have to cut a little opening in that and then feed the wires through. Don't forget to check the rotation of the props. Let's start feeding the wires in. I'm going to try to hide that one a little bit earlier than I did in the Titan. Get it in that cowling area. Just go little bit by little bit until you get things stuffed in there. That section has been hollowed out to house the speed controls, and like on the Titan, I want to ventilate this area. Well, I ran into the support pipe coming out of that hole. I had to trim it shorter a little bit, I thought, you know what, I'll just use that. So we'll exhaust through that. I'll put a little bit of clear epoxy on that to bond it in place, and then I'll worry about a scoop in a little while. We've got the speed controls and the battery connectors, and a little bit of hot glue in there. All set up. I got 2 battery wires coming out of here, then the speed control connects down here, and this one's going to head forward for the camera system, which I nearly forgot again. Since I had to break out so much styrofoam, I'm going to reinforce this. So we'll push this one in here, and I want it right next to this wall. Push that in there, and I'll back it out and push it into that front bulkhead there. Like that. We'll shove that in there about an inch or so. And then I'll reinforce this area with hot glue. This is going to get messed with a lot, being that where you plug the batteries in. The batteries are going to sit side by side, a side saddle sort of situation. That's tricky to say. And they're just going to kind of be hanging out. Same thing with the wires, which I don't like, but, you know, what do you do? There's just not enough room in this airplane. You need a bigger one to do this, but this is what's available, so we're going to make it fly. It's time to put the camera unit in the airplane, because I don't know quite how long to make the power wire to it. I need to get the camera mounted farther back in this one, partly for the center of gravity and partly because the instrument panel was too close to the camera and I couldn't focus on it. I didn't want to take this whole chunk out of here because I want space behind it for the wiring, but I didn't want to take the whole chunk out of there. It's too much. I think it'll leak in the airplane too much, even though I've got it reinforced pretty well. So I'll cut this section out, because this will be a good area for the camera to be able to turn around, look up, down, behind. And then, similar to the Titan, I'll cut a little compartment out here to house the wiring, and I may or may not put the receiver in the same compartment. I probably will, but it depends on how the build goes. Anyway, right now I'm going to cut this section out and then take this off to see where my next cuts are going to have to be. I suppose I will save this chunk right here and set it aside, but I might build a little cowling for it once I get the camera situated in the airplane. We'll see how things go. Always save your parts. In order to lay this out, I simply took this, marked each side of it like so, and then I centered it up with the calipers, and I grabbed this block because it was sitting there. I just rolled it up to make that mark. However, a measure will work just fine as well. I think the best way to cut this section out, I'd like to have that chunk out of there. And I don't need to go all the way back to this point, probably to about here. I think the best way to deal with this is just to cut it off at the floor and remove it, cut those two sections out, and then put the two walls back in. There. Now I can shape that by getting the two walls out of it. And that's why I figured I'd save this section here, because I'll probably cut that up too, just to clean that up a little bit. We'll set that thing in right about there. Now I've made two side panels. It can go in there just about like that. We'll bond that together. I'll do that later, so I don't mess them up while I'm fooling around with this thing. I went ahead and made those two pieces also. Figured why not? Make the thing look nicer. I was looking at the way the cockpit sits in the airplane. I think it's too low, and I've got too much flex here. So I grabbed the piece of a 2x4 that I had left over, and we'll bond that to the styrofoam and set the cockpit on top of it. I'll have to make a hole for the servo and for the screws, but that'll get us up high enough, and it'll put the strength back for the cost of only a tiny bit of weight. I had to make the floorboard out of a bigger piece because once I got the servo hole cut out with the 4 holes around it for the mounting holes, it was just too fragile. So it's a little bigger and it fits those side panels a little bit closer. So we'll get that attached to the airplane after I cut the hole for the servo. Well, the camera unit is mounted in with 2 Phillips screws. I can put the side panels on it now. Cockpit area turned out really nice. I'll let this thing cure before I do any more work to it. I started a hole for the wires that'll go back to the receiver area. I'm using the filler putty to create a contour for the motor mount into the wing, just for looks and for airflow. And I've got the motor mounts covered up on the underside. Just get this thing sanded up and put another layer on it to finish that contour. I need to make a receiver bay, so I just took a sight down the wing to establish where I wanted that piece of tape, and then this one was just there from when I laid out the cockpit. Just stick one there, and with the calipers, go from the center mold mark to the edge, go to the other side and put a mark on it. Do the same thing on this side. And mark it. So take your tape and connect the dots. Now everything's nice and symmetrical. Put 3 layers of tape. That's enough to guide that hot wire through the foam. Alright, let's get that cut out. Then we'll make a little hollow for the receiver itself and passageways for the wires. I like the sound that makes. That passageway is already in there. The receiver ought to fit down in that hole I carved out for it. Barely enough room for, probably should go this direction so I can put the servo wires in it, but barely enough room, which is generally what you want. And we'll figure out how to lay out the antennas. It'll probably go about there. Got to run the aileron servos and their wires, the elevator runner servos and their wires, and the power wire for that camera unit. Actually, I'll probably stick it in there just about like that with the wires under it. I just realized that was a perfect fit. The battery wire for the camera unit is tucked in neatly underneath the receiver. There's enough of a coil back here so you can get the unit out and plug it in easily. I've added an extension wire to both the servo leads for the pan and the tilt, so it makes that easier as well. I suppose I will get on with installing the servos and running the wires for those. Actually, before I do the servos, because of the way the wires need to come through the fuselage, I better put the batteries in it first. They need to go back there somehow. And unfortunately, the wires are just going to hang out in the breeze. There's just not enough room in this thing. The Titan was a lot bigger around through the entire length of the thing, and this one gets skinny right past here. So anyway, to put those on the airplane, I figure I'll run a board through the fuselage and set that on there like a shelf. Maybe a peg, not sure yet, use a rubber band. I'll mess around with it for a minute and figure it out. I figured it out. Just got a couple of tongue depressors, slide them through the fuselage with the styro sword. I will epoxy these in there. And not only is it double as a battery mount, but I'll be able to pull some rubber bands across this to hold the batteries on the airplane. I'll probably put a peg through the fuselage behind it and in front of it as a guide to keep them honest. Then I'll trim the excess. That little battery shelf should be all we need to hold those two on. Just put a couple of rubber bands around it. Next thing I need to clean up is that section right there with the speed controls and the battery wires in it. We'll use the filler, but I don't want to get all that stuff tangled up with fillers, so I'll put a piece of sandpaper in there like that. That'll grab a hold of that filler really well, and I can make a little cover for that. Not a removable one, but... And this area will eventually become an air scoop to force air through that pipe and around those speed controls to keep them cool. I had to rebuild this thing today. I'm kind of glad I did. It turns out I had it sitting in the cockpit and I flipped the plane over and dropped it. Well, I broke the servo for the tilt. Had to replace that. And I thought, well, I should probably plug in the goggles and see if this thing works, which it did not. The plug came undone and one of the wires had broken, and I broke one of the antenna wires, so I had to get the FreeSky receiver that's sitting in the box and grab the antennas off of that and put it on here. And I put the switch in the front on the top to make it a little bit easier to get to and give us a little bit more room in the back. And I put a nicer wire on this one. It's a little bit more flexible. That'll be easier to plug it in. And it's slimmer along the side because I put all the wires underneath the fin instead of alongside it. So, lots of improvements here. Glad I did that, but it took most of the afternoon to get it done. Camera module is mounted nicely in the cockpit now. And I've got both the batteries mounted back here. They just plug in like that. And that's where the wires are going to be. That sanded out nicely. I'm about to start putting the servos in it. And I'll put the elevator servo in it about halfway because I want that to come out right about in the middle of that hard spot that we created with the epoxy. A little while I'll take some epoxy and put a thin layer over any of that filler because it's very, very soft. You could scratch it with your fingernails. I cut the slot for the wire deep enough to put the rudder and the elevator wire in there, and we'll drop it into the receiver bay at that point. I'm trying to save filler putty at this point. I'm getting really low on it. Let's put that rudder servo in. Vertical stabilizer. I didn't bring my depth gauge, so we'll just have to eyeball it. A little bit too wide on that one. I got on the wrong side of the pen mark. Oh well. Ain't gonna bother it. Take a chunk out of that like that. Dig it out flat with a flat blade screwdriver. It works better when they're not covered in epoxy. And there. Keep doing that until you get it deep enough. Had to let this warm up for a second. Take another pass at it. You think you got it too wide, like I did the first time. Just don't go as far with it the second time. And filler putty is magic. You get good adhesives and you get good filler putty. It's just up to your imagination after that. That's pretty good. It's still hot. Oh, hold on. Might as well take that wire. Just go through the other side with it. That way I can get it into the other elevator wire slot. I guess that's what you want to call it. I like using hot glue on this stuff because you get it back off. Just a little pro tip: if you don't have electronics involved with it, hot water will soften that stuff. Just hold it in there for a second. Styrofoam is a good insulator, so it takes a minute for the hot glue to cool off. But that's okay. I guess I'll put a little bit more around it just to beef it up a little bit. Now we can run the wires. I'll try to filter out the noise from that air conditioner in editing, but if I leave it off for very long, it just gets humid. It's off right now. It really gives me a hard time because I can't afford to mess around leaving that thing on. And I can't have it off because I can't turn the whole house into a fungus factory. That's not going to be very good at all. Just wherever you think it's going to be high, just put some glue in there. And like I said about styrofoam, it takes a minute to cool off. Get in there with that. Let's see if I can fish that through with something. There we go. Let's tuck it in. Come on, get in there. Make sure everything's below the surface. I suppose after I get the servos mounted and working, I'll put that cowl together right about there. Still thinking of how to make that thing for a couple days. The rudder and elevator servos are installed. I have to do the aileron servos next. I decided to put all of them and their hardware on the top side to keep the bottom relatively smooth. That way it doesn't catch up on anything and break it if I have to land it in the grass. I have to install the altimeter, which is right there, and I had just enough filler putty left to close up the slot for the wire for those two servos. More will be here next week, along with the RFID unit, which will go right in the rudder. I want a little bit more weight in the tail. I hate the RFID, but I don't feel like arguing with the FAA about it for 30 bucks. I ran the wires for the ailerons along the bottom and into the receiver bay. I was able to get all the wires and the altimeter tucked in right under the receiver. We'll put that antenna up front there and these two along there underneath the cap. I put the top of the fuselage back on it. The antennas are in place, and I started sanding the slope in to the air intake area where the scoop is going to be. We'll connect the aileron servo to the aileron. A little wire with a Z-bend on it. That'll guide you to your location. You want to make sure that you're even with the right and the left wing back and forth like that, and square with the servo. And you can measure that and clip it. Back that screw out just a little bit, make sure it's not in the way. There. And make sure your aileron is centered. Whoops. I'm clumsy. All right, now we'll check that against the other one right about there. We'll make a dot. We'll make another dot. And then I can poke through that with this hot thing when this thing warms up. Unplugged it. Yes. Technical difficulty has been corrected. I don't want that very hot because I don't want the hole very big. Drop the screws down through the holes. Or just drop the screw, whichever comes first. And then on the other side, we'll pick up that nut. And it's best to do this with the power connected. That way there's some tension on the servo to make sure everything lines up in the middle where it's supposed to be. I'm trying not to be in the way of this thing with my hand, but it can be difficult. We both want, and that one's going to be out of alignment, so there we got it. Do the best we can. There it goes. You want this little base plate to be flush with the bottom of the airfoil. And when you've got it embedded into that epoxy on both sides, it makes it really strong. Center that back up. And I noticed we're a little bit long with that one, so we'll figure out where to put the screwdriver at. Yeah, that's still loose. Okay. Take that off of there and trim it up. That was really quite long for this application. I heard that screw take off, and I don't know where it is. Oh, there we go. So, zero that. This has still got power on it, so it's not moving anywhere. Tighten that screw down on that rod. Double check the zero. Put a good crank on that, and then a little bit of CA glue on the screw and where it meets the where that rod meets the clevis. That's it. Now that I've got power connected to everything, might as well just check everything and make sure it's all going to work. I'll throw it off. Alright. It's a good sign. Hey, neat. Everything's going in the right direction today. Next thing I need to do is finish up the landing gear. I put that one in, forgot to do the video. It's not that big of a deal. Go watch the Titan video, and between these two, you'll know how to work with styrofoam better than anybody else that you know. So, I want it right about there, a little bit past the center of gravity, and I wanted it to be like taller than on the Titan. So, I cut the block and stacked it like that. I'm just going to recess that in there a little bit for strength and take it in there about 3/16 of an inch or so. This is how you level your wings in this step. Just mess around with that block with the way it sits in there. Sanding either it or the fuselage, whichever is easier or more appropriate for your situation until your wings are level. Let's mix up some epoxy. I think that'll be stronger than hot glue. Shove that into that hole. You want a good amount in there. surface is nice and rough, which is what you want. And you want more than enough epoxy in there. If it squeezes out the edges, you did it right. If it didn't, there ain't enough in there, try again. Flip that around to make sure that it's level with the wings. Working on this air intake scoop. I got this flexible wood from someplace. I didn't know it was that flexible, whoops. But I think I'm just gonna go with it. Just about like that. Now the first thing that I have to do before I can put this cowl together is wait for the epoxy to dry. I had to put a thin coat over all that filler, because if I try to super glue the styrofoam, it's going to eat the styrofoam. But I should be able to glue it to that epoxy without a problem. That air intake scoop turned out real well, and it came together a lot easier than I really expected it to do. Once I get the filler, I can close up the sides and sort of feather it in, and I'll find some sort of a coating to make it white with. That ought to do the job. I found a quart of white paint and a brush. I started here and it kind of spread all over the whole airplane before I knew what happened. Just kidding. I put a heavy coat on the horizontal stabilizer, partly to strengthen it, but partly to add weight to the rear of the airplane. I went over the entirety of the aileron, but I stopped at the servo because I want to sand an airfoil onto this wing. It's a little blocky. It needs more of a curve. I can get more lift out of it if I do that. Tomorrow when this thing's dry, I'll flip it over and paint the bottom. With the help of a little bit of hot glue and some foam board, I've corrected the airflow problem around that wheel mount. That's better. Sanded that leading edge of the wing on both sides to make sure I could get a better airfoil. I've actually proven this works with these airplanes in just free flight. It definitely produces more lift. The airplane is almost balanced. The filler putty and the RFID unit should be here on tomorrow. I was going to put the RFID in the rudder, but with the battery level indicator here in the wing, I suppose I'll put it over here and add another little foam airfoil to smooth things out a little bit. I added a tungsten rod to the horizontal stabilizer. Basically, that was the only place left I could put that much weight. It's attached with hot glue. Imagine that tungsten, one of the hardest materials attached to styrofoam, one of the softest. I put some temporary black dots on the edge of the control surfaces to see if I could see those from the goggles. At this point, all I have to do now is put an instrument panel in it. Be a little bitty one in there. I'd say that'll get it done. Oh, when I ran that pipe up through the tail section, it cut off right about here. And this happens to be a weak spot with these kind of gliders, so I'm going to run another support through, one on each side. And I didn't get anything in hand to push that with, so you get the idea, but that will create more strength between the wing and the tail section by using the wing root. That was pretty close. That one came right in through underneath the battery, but it went up into the vertical stabilizer, so I'm quite happy with how that turned out. All right, UPS just brought me a box. Got the remote ID module in it. A little bit of black paint. That black paint was like 60 cents. It's enough to clean up the interior of this thing a little bit. My putty's here, so, oh yeah, and the numbers for the remote ID. Now, I'm gonna go in town and register this thing because I don't know if that changes my registration number or not. So I'll know in a little while. The remote ID chip is in place. and it works just fine. I gotta sand this thing out, balance it, and it's ready to fly. We're almost ready to go. I've got the required FAA numbers on it. Got it decorated the way I wanted to. It's all sanded out. Started off like this, ended up like that. Mainly the reason I grabbed that airplane is to show the before and after with that wing profile after I'd sanded the airfoil into it. If this thing is too heavy, I have another idea. I'm a lot more confident that this airplane will fly after dealing with the Titan. It is a little bit heavier. Once I get the balance figured out, I will weigh it. I think it's about 3.5 pounds right now. If it is too heavy or if it is sluggish, I have a plan. We'll grab a second set of wings. I'll cut them off right here where they meet the fuselage. I'll bond them together with a little bit of dihedral and we'll make a dragonfly. Basically a biplane. That'll have plenty of lift. Pick up another airplane for $10, $10 to ship it. So, you know, I kind of like that idea. It looks pretty neat. That'll be the next build. I've got it perched on the balancer. I called it a balance beam a couple times earlier, but clearly there's no beam. So if you guys could let me know in the comments section what that thing's actually called, I'd appreciate it. One little piece of tungsten, and we'll put it in the vertical stabilizer. Put a little bit of filler putty on that, and she floats. We can finally find out the flying weight of this airplane. This thing's heavy. All right, 3 pounds, 10, 11, 3 pounds, 10 and a half. Goodness gracious, it's over 3.5 pounds. All right, metric, which we should be using here in the States. 1,660 grams. This thing's heavy enough where I decided I wanted to make a biplane out of this one. So all I've done off camera, because for what, like, there was just too much going on to figure out how to square up this wing to mess with the camera. So I just used the masking tape and the hot wire cutter to slice that wing, and I bonded it back together. And interestingly enough, when I followed that factory line, it gave me a little bit of dihedral, which was a bit of a surprise, pleasantly. Now, I've made a couple of squares that'll stand up on themselves, and I got the hot glue gun over there ready. I'm going to stick this to the piano surface. There's a foam block under each of the wingtips to keep things level. I'm going to stick those down, and until I bump the airplane, I had it square with this laser. So I took a fine tip Sharpie and I marked it in a couple of places, and the idea here will be to center that laser and square this up, and all I really have to do at that point is worry about this axis, because those two operations take care of the other two. I'll have to figure out how to make a piece to bridge the gap between the two wings in probably 3 places. I'll figure it out. Just to hold things still, I put a little bit of hot glue right there. I know it'll chunk the wing out when I take it out of there, but I can fill it up on both sides. And on the front wheel, I glued that to the piano surface to hold things still. Needed wheel chocks. There's a single dot of hot glue at the top of that air intake attaching that wing, which I'll use for a pivot. And you can see that chunk of pink foam in the back. I can change the height of that until I can get the angle correct. Both wings have to be parallel with one another along the chord line. Oh, I made this keel to go between the fuselage and the wing. And it was really tricky to set up because I had to take a lot of measurements from the cord line on both of the wings and then transfer them over to the front to make sure everything was equal. I'm about to glue that keel piece in and then go to work on, I don't know what those parts are called on a biplane. It will hold create the structure between the two wings, but I need to build that. Some of those skewer sticks held in there with hot glue. We'll just trim it off when it's cool with some diagonals. Pretty sure 8 of those, along with that keel, will hold that wing on there just fine. Well, I have a biplane. That's not what I was expecting to happen, but I think with as much as this thing weighs, and I will get a final weight in a couple of minutes, I figured probably 2 wings is better than 1. I bet you most people aren't going to notice that this is a biplane because they didn't watch the whole video. And much to my surprise, I didn't have to change the center of gravity in this thing at all. Let's see how much this Dragonfly weighs. 3 pounds, 13.5, 15, 13, 3 pounds, 14 ounces. Let's try kilograms or grams. We're looking at 17, about 50. All right, let's go fly it. I almost forgot. I've got to sand that leading edge on that wing to create an airfoil like I did on the lower wing. I want as much lift as I can get. Right now it looks like I've got about a wingspan of 7'5", 7'6", right in there between the two of those. It is August 19th, 2025. We're about to try to fly the Dragonfly FPV, maiden voyage. Well, it cracked the tail on that last flight when I almost hit the chair again, but that first repair actually helped. Utah, because it broke somewhere else. And I decided to try this as a monoplane because the biplane, well, that should be built from the ground up. I'm going to buy 2 more of these, and I'm going to set it up as a free flight glider to get it to fly that way, and then I'll start putting all the radio stuff in it. I'd say that's the end of that one. The repairs I made with the fiberglass and the till held up just fine. And everything on it works. It's just too heavy, or I just stalled it. It might have flown if I had gotten a little bit flatter trajectory when I let go of it. The air unit was submerged when I tried to get it out. However, it still works because of this stuff. It's called Corrosion X HD. You spray it on your electronics, and if they get wet, like today, they will still work. Everything on that airplane, including the motors, has been treated with that stuff.